Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much and welcome back to our afternoon session. At this time, I'll introduce who we have regarding Andrea and Rachel will be our speakers for this afternoon session regarding writing and capabilities for your students to extend their technical experience and research and be able to publish. So we are excited. So Andrea and Rachel, at this time, thank you so much for being here and the floor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all so much. I'm Andrea Balo. I'm the Executive Director for the STEM-E and Career Development Program. Rachel, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. My name is Rachel. I'm a sophomore in high school. I live over in New Jersey. I'm an intern at Stemi, and I'm really excited to be a part of this AJ STEM program.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. So thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to introduce a new program that Rachel will be working on and managing, and I'm kind of in the background helping orchestrate and then also do some of the teaching, more of the teaching as we go along in the writing course. So feel free to break in at any point in time and ask your questions. Rachel, if you don't mind monitoring the chat in case I miss any questions, that would be great as well. And I'm going to hop right in. So I'll share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
We can.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so today what I'm going to talk about is launching AJ STEM, which is the Academic Journal of STEM Research for Youth. Now, there's been some development and excitement around bringing this to students. I'll talk a little bit more about what this is, but before I hop into what AJ STEM is and what our ultimate goal and advantages for students, I'm also going to describe myself, give a little bit of my background, talk about STEMI, and then our collaboration with the Science and Engineering Fair of Houston. And then towards the end, I'll also be talking about some advice and writing tips for scientific writing. So first off, I want to kind of give a quick snapshot of my background because I'm sure it's always curious, you know, somebody coming in and then telling you all about scientific writing. So, and I like to start from the beginning because I, like many of y'all's, I'm sure, story is very twisted and windy, and I think a bit interesting to see where I've come from and also where I am now, and then also the experience that I bring with it. So I was born and raised in Texas, spent most of my youth in Houston. And when I was young, I was actually more interested in the arts. But around junior high is when, around junior year in high school is when I started to get really interested in STEM. I started being part of Science Olympiad and all the other different aspects of science and engineering. And from there, I decided to apply to MIT. I got in, and so I went to MIT for my undergrad and got a bachelor's in biology. While I was at MIT, I also did various internships at the Yale University School of Medicine, Whitehead Institute, which is part of MIT, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Massachusetts General Hospital, and Columbia University, all around various different types of medical research. And so this gave me a lot of perspective of not only different biomedical research fields, but also how to approach a new scientific field. I did everything from tumor genesis, immunology, lung cancer research, neuroscience. So hopping from field to field really gave me a perspective of what it was like to join a new field, research it, develop experiments, hypotheses, better understand that process, and then try and turn around and publish on it. After that, I took a year and worked at the National Institute of Health. And then from there, I applied to medical school and graduate school, and I went to UCLA, the David Geffen School of Medicine, and did part of my work there. And that, even though I didn't wind up actually pursuing medicine, it was something that really gave me a strong perspective in the medical field prior to where I am now. From there, I left with my master's in immunology and then moved back to Houston and kind of was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, whether it was pursue a PhD or move on and do more business related stuff. And so I worked at the Houston Methodist Hospital, where I worked in a few labs there, mostly around cancer research and RNA therapeutics, which y'all are all aware now with Moderna and Pfizer. So I worked in that field very intimately. And I started a company tutoring with Andrea, and that started getting me into my business oriented side of things. That's also where I also taught a lot. Prior to tutoring with Andrea, I had been teaching for many years. I was an undergraduate TA at MIT, worked at test prep companies. And so a lot of this teaching really brought around for me a better understanding of where students were struggling and how we could do things better. So all of that led me to starting Stemi, and also recognizing that I needed more business experience, which is why I went to Rice University to get my MBA. So Stemi, which I'll describe here in a minute, is my way of trying to give back, nonprofit organization, taking all of my teaching experience as well as my degrees in biomedical research, and really trying to pass along that knowledge to the youth that we have, while also creating a more level playing field for those students who don't have the privilege or the opportunities that I may have had coming up and coming through the ranks. Right now, I'm currently, in addition to being the executive director for Stemi, I also work as a marketing manager and leadership track for Paul Biotech and Danaher Company. And then that's also, as part of Stemi, we're collaborating with the Science and Engineering Fair to develop AJ STEM, the academic journal of STEM research. So that's a bit about my background. If you have any questions, please feel free, but I think it's nice to kind of see how all of my different experiences come together and yielded Stemi, but then also yielded AJ STEM as well. So what is AJ STEM? Or I'm sorry, what is Stemi? So if you're interested, please take a look at STEMI.org. That's our website. We have many different programs. It's the STEMI Youth Career Development Program. STEM, as you all are aware, science, technology, engineering, math. So what is the E? E is for entrepreneurship. But it's not about hard skills. It really is about that career development. It's really about helping students understand their career paths. And so our mission is to globally educate youth in critical thinking and professional skills through uniquely integrated STEM and entrepreneurship programming. And we started in 2018 and are headquartered in Houston, Texas, but we've been blessed with being able to move digitally and do a lot of our events to now having participants all over the world come and join us, having interns all over the world. So it's been a really exciting process, actually kind of moving through a time when it's very difficult, but it actually in some ways, I think, allowing us to create a greater impact, which is great. And so far in the past with Stemi, we've had over 35 events. So we're only 3 years old, 3.5-ish years old, but we've had over 35 events and workshops with speaking engagements, hands-on activities, and startup boot camps. And that has allowed us to impact over 1,500 participants thus far, and hopefully a lot more in the future. And so I'd say if you want to learn more, please go to our website. It has all our upcoming events. We've had many programs in the past. We have an amazing internship program as well, which Rachel is part of and has been amazing running our blog team. We have tons of articles. We have a magazine. And all of this is largely run by middle school and high school students. So they want to come in, volunteer, contribute, have a voice. And we're very lucky that we're able to provide that platform for them. And I might have cats join us imminently, just to be aware. So what is AJ STEM? So AJ STEM is the academic journal of STEM research. This is something new. It does not exist. It's something that's kind of a baby idea of mine that I've been hoping for a few years now to be able to launch. And now we're at a place to where we can do that. It is an open source, free, and what I consider to be a professional academic journal for the publication of STEM research that is conducted prior to undergraduate school. And in the beginning, so how did we come about thinking about this? This was part of a vision to run a professional lab as part of STEMI, which we do have STEMI labs, and we have taught students how to work in a lab with middle school and high school students, something that's not often afforded to students. and publishing original experiments that are generated as part of this program. Me and my background and my experience in the biomedical field, there are a lot of experiments that get left to the wayside because they're not big enough or may not seem interesting enough, and yet would be highly impactful to the various medical fields. And so being able to take those opportunities that would be relatively easy for students to conduct, as you can see by our amazing student population as part of the Science and Engineering Fair, they create some and complete some amazing projects and opportunities. So being able to take that and publish it and be able to put that information out there has always been kind of a vision of mine. But it transitioned into a method where we want to teach scientific writing, provide a realistic view of STEM research, because there's always this view that when you're going into STEM research or science research, it's all hands-on. There's this, and that's a big misconception, that they don't realize that there's a lot of communication and there's a lot of writing and reading and presentation that goes into this role. And so if you are not comfortable and you do not want to do that side of things, that's going to be a big eye opener for a lot of students trying to pursue these careers. So it provides a realistic view of research and provides a way for STEM research to live on past the time in which they conducted these experiments. Now, this is a separate program from the Science and Engineering Fair of Houston. Stemi is its own nonprofit, but we are doing this completely in collaboration with the SEFH, which is something that we've been talking about for a while in terms of various ways for our groups to collaborate. I've been able to attend the SEFH for a few years now, since 2018. So it's really exciting for us to be able to now have an opportunity to collaborate and move forward. So for the program, students can publish abstracts, posters, and articles. So any of the three or all of the three, whatever they prefer. The abstracts and posters and polished articles are accepted and published on a rolling basis. It is a digital academic journal. And students can also enroll in our annual 5-month scientific writing training program. And I'll break that down a bit more. So just to give you a preview, this is the website. You can also look at it yourself by going to aj-stem.com or aj-stem.org. And so students will be able to submit and publish, and obviously they'll be given full authorship. There's no copyright issues. The articles, the information, the research belongs to the student that publishes it. And whoever completes our 5-month program, they get a certificate of completion, and they also get a printed PDF version of their manuscript so that they can have kind of as a congratulatory result from writing and completing this course. So for the timeline, as I mentioned, we have abstracts, posters, and polished articles will be published on a rolling basis year-round. But for the 5-month training program, we will have rolling applications that end May 23rd. So for those students who are going through the competition process and are about to move on to state or nationals, we will offer 25 slots for students who want to do an abstract and title refresher. We kind of will act as, an editor, be able to help them polish up those abstracts and titles before they go on and move on to their competitions. For the program itself, it will launch the end of May after the final competitions have ended for the year. So we're not trying to run in or affect the competition process that they have. This is an after the fact situation for those students who are really interested in truly learning how to write a scientific article and publish it and have it basically live on in perpetuity. So we'll launch at the end of May. The first month, we're going to cover methods. The second month, we'll cover the results of their paper, and we go through lessons where we'll have them write, and then we also go through an editing process. Discussion in August, introduction in September, abstract and title in October, and we'll have a graduation kind of ceremony and congratulations at the very end. And we will have a few months for editing and cleaning up before we launch the issue at the beginning of February, right before the next Science and Engineering Fair. So this will be kind of our annual process of a 5-month training program that leads to an issue once every February. Now, those that are rolling, they'll just consistently be published throughout the year. So they won't wait until February 1st. But those ones that go through the training program, they will get launched in an official issue once a year. So some of the program advantages, as I alluded to before, exposure to science writing, which is a critical part of research, and also something that students need to be aware of if they really want to pursue this process. This idea that you are reading and writing half of your time, if not a good, chunk of it. And so if that's something that they're not interested in and that they don't want to do, I think it's important that they recognize that now. Training in scientific writing, which in my mind, scientific writing is a great basis for any type of writing. It really teaches you how to write clearly, to the point, straightforward, concise, which nowadays in the education system, it's really difficult to teach that level of just straight to the point writing. No fluff, no figurative language, nothing. And I think it gives a great basis for skeletal writing, which is theoretically what you would want when you're trying to build style on top of writing, or figurative language on top of writing. So it's a great basis for understanding the real mechanics of basic language and persuasion. It's also a method for research to live on past the competitions, which I think is really exciting for students. And it's great for college applications and resumes to be able to say, take a look at my link. Here's my published article. Here's my published poster. So last, what I want to do is take us through doing an introduction in scientific writing and reading. And now this is all my viewpoints. This is coming from my experience. I understand that there's going to be many viewpoints on how to go about this. And then also, we will be sending out after this presentation a handout that has a summary of these slides, particularly the science and writing, as well as a template for students to use to take them through the scientific writing process that I'll actually be demonstrating here, and the same writing process that we'll be taking for the 5-month course. So you guys can take it and use it in your classrooms or whatever format that you want to use it in. Please feel free. Again, this is supposed to be shared knowledge. There's no proprietary anything. So please take it and use it. So first, when you're thinking about experimental planning, there's oftentimes this mindset of starting from the beginning. In fact, in most things, people think start from the beginning. And if there was one lesson that I wish I could impart on everybody, it's you should always start from the end on pretty much anything in life. You should always ask yourself, where do you want to go? And then walk yourself back. And the same goes for experimental planning. And I wish I knew this sooner in my career. When I worked in a Nobel laureates lab, they always started from the end and where they wanted to publish and how they wanted to publish. And they knew exactly which figures they needed to publish and exactly which experiments to do to get us there. And they never wasted any time doing anything extra. And there's a reason why that method works. It may not necessarily open up sometimes to some fishing expeditions, but it does get you where you need to go in your career, let's put it that way, and gets you to move up pretty quickly. So in the beginning, especially for instance, whenever I'm joining a new field and I need to come up with a question or a hypothesis that I need to build experiments around. Y'all are aware, and I'm sure y'all know this, about really figuring out what question you want. But sometimes you don't even know where to start. And so a lot of it is just going through the articles, researching, reading up on stuff, reading reviews, and trying to figure out connections and questions that pop up as you go through and just read and read and read. And that's usually why also the first 2 to 3 months of a research internship or role is just reading. That's all you're asked to do, is just sit and read. Because you will generate ideas as you go through, and you'll start to see gaps in the knowledge. And a lot of the articles will point out the obvious gaps in the knowledge and something that you want to ask. And also as you read, you'll start to develop a hypothesis around some of those gaps in knowledge. Some of those hypotheses will be talked about for you, and then some of them you'll be able to generate on your own. Once you have a hypothesis, though, this is where you start to think at the end, which is you need to think about the scientific article in the end and where you want to go with it. You need to think about what figures, what is your ultimate story that you're going to tell? What are you hoping to prove or disprove, which again is your hypothesis? And what figures or experiments do you need to do that? And in fact, a lot of cases, this is actually where you would already build out the figures that you would need for your paper in order to do that. And I'll show you, I have a little recording here of the template that we have where you start out with the storyboarding. And so you would actually do that in the end. I mean, at the very beginning, And then ask yourself, what methods and what experiments do I need to do in order to fill out that storyboard? And so what experiments are needed to prove or disprove that hypothesis? And then that's when you actually start thinking about your plan for building out your experiments. The next step is writing as you go, which seems obvious as well, but a lot of times I think this can often get lost. And it's something that even in my experience, even in working with established scientists, we don't hone in on this as much as we should. It's so valuable. Me working in a lab where we are talking about patents and invention disclosures and proprietary information. It's just so critical, and it often gets lost that high critical importance of writing down everything that you do and dating it and signing it and making sure it's understandable and readable and repeatable. Those things that until you're in an industry where you can't get your patent because your lab notebook isn't good, it gets lost very quickly. And so most of this is about building the right habit and designing and writing the experiments with good documentation habits first. But one thing that also gets forgotten is documenting all your resources as you go. So even in the very beginning, when I'm researching and thinking of a new question or a new hypothesis, I'm already referencing all of those reviews. I'm referencing all of the sources that I'm going through. I'm numbering them, or I'm entering them into some sort of reference program. If I have it that way for the kids, they might just be writing it down. It should also be in your notebook at the very beginning. What led you to this hypothesis? What led you to this question? What is everything that you read that brought you to where you are now? Because that elucidates where the gap in the knowledge is, and all of that is going to go into your paper ultimately. So it's good to have all of that written down from the very beginning. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of this is about starting with research, just reading reviews and trying to get a better in-depth idea of where you want to go. The other great thing that you can do, which I'll also mention later on, is you can start writing your methods now in nice, succinct paragraphs. A lot of times when we put it into our notebook, it's about, you write your materials first, and then you write your instructions. You can also take that and immediately put it into paragraph format so that then you're writing your methods as you go. And it makes it a lot easier to move through your experiments and write at the very end, because you don't have as much to do. And one thing that I want to talk about, so now that we've thought about designing the experiment and then also documenting the experiment, one thing I also want to talk about before I hop into actually writing the paper is first reading papers. I think it's sometimes either not well articulated, or it's lost on the fact that there is a difference between reading an article when you're new to the field versus reading an article when you are much more comfortable in the field. So the first month or so, whenever I'm reading articles, I am, for all intents and purposes, a novice. I'm looking at it in the way that I'm going to detail here. But after about 1 to 2 months, where I've read so many articles, I become somewhat of a knowledge base in the field, and my reading switches completely. And I think that that's important to know when you are going through this process. Novices in the field, and again, that I'm not talking age, I'm talking just experience in any field that you hop into and you don't know about that field. We'll start with reviews, or should start with reviews, to get a very generic sense of, okay, what's the overall knowledge in this field? What do I need to know prior to even hopping into a very detailed science experiment and paper? I don't want to just hop straight into a paper because I don't have any background for the field itself. Then I launch into scientific articles, and that gives me a better sense of, okay, now when I'm reading the introduction, I don't have to look up every single paragraph because I didn't have a basis before. Now I have a basis because I read the reviews. And then novices do tend to read from beginning to end, which makes sense. You don't have as much perspective, so you need to understand the introduction. You might not have as much perspective over the methods, so you should review the methods, then go into the results, and then finally into the conclusions and discussion, and kind of see what they're saying. The hardest thing about reading as a novice is you don't know how to opine about their opinions. You don't know how to constructively deconstruct what they are trying to tell you. And so you have to be very careful about reading the discussion as a novice, because you can be easily swayed to a point of view before you even have a perspective for yourself. But as a scientist, whenever you're more advanced within the field, this is where you really start to kind of break down. It's a different type of reading. For more read scientists, we read untraditionally. We actually start straight with the data. We go straight to the figures. We don't even read the introduction. Now I do skim the authors and where they're from, because I want to know right off the bat, okay, do I trust, where's my trust level on this? Is it high or is it low? And then I hop right into the data and the figures, and it should be able to tell itself. If I have to ask a lot of questions, or things don't quite add up or make or even tell a story in the figures, instantly my trust of the article itself drops. And so I should be able to read it for the most part from beginning to end, just with the figures, generate my own conclusions, and then hop to the discussion to see what they say as their conclusions. And the only time I really jump to results is whenever I need some clarification. The only time I jump to methods is when I'm not sure about the exact method or that they're using, or there's something that pokes me wrong about the way that they might be doing this. And so I'll go to the methods and ask myself, okay, what's their sample size? Who are they using? How did they verify the people? Things like that. And again, the introduction, I will only pinpoint at it if it has a new topic that I haven't read reviews on or read about. And so it's very on an as needed basis. And then I hop to the discussion and I ask myself, okay, what are they saying are the implications? What are they saying is the impact? And when I go through the results, do I agree with it? Most of the time you're going to have a mixture of, okay, I agree with this, and no, that's blown out of the water. I don't agree with that. Or it's, no, I don't agree with any of any of this. But it allows for a very critical nature of viewing the papers themselves when you do it this way. What I find interesting is, even now in business, when I'm looking at strategy, when I'm developing strategy for a business, this is the exact same method that I go through. I never ask myself what other people think. I never look through presentations. I go straight to the data. And I ask myself, what does the data tell me? And how can I explain the data? And what are people assuming or making opinions about based on whatever they're thinking? And do I agree with that? And does the data support that? So I think this is something that's not well taught, not often taught in any field, even in our science field when we think about it. And I think it's a really important lesson to know that this, when you get to a place where you're comfortable, you have a good background, this is how you should be reading, which is really starting with the data. But it also helps us when we're writing papers, because when we're writing papers, this states that the data should tell a story. And that's what I'm going to get to now, which is when we're thinking about writing an article, your data should tell a story. So when we're thinking about writing a scientific article, as I mentioned from the very beginning, you should actually be doing a storyboarding of the articles. But what you can do as you're going through is also start with the methods. And the reason why starting with the methods in terms of writing, it's the easiest, because you're just writing what you did. From there, you want to make sure that you have your figures storyboarded out prior to hopping into any results or conclusions or anything else. You would then move to your results, write your discussion, tie it into the introduction, and then build the abstract at the end, and then develop the title absolutely last. Most scientists know that this is the way to write, but it's a very odd thing to explain, that you never start from the beginning when you're writing. You start from the methods, which are the easiest. You move to the results, assuming you already storyboarded your figures. And this is because it's a lot, methods is never going to change. It's what you did. So that should always be complete. The results really depend on the figures that you're writing and also the story that you're trying to tell. But at the same point, it doesn't change. Your results are your results. Now, there is the way that you present the graphs that builds the story, but the data is the data. The discussion, however, is your opinion of the data. And so that can change. And now that you've built out most of the story, it allows you to go back and be like, okay, now what do I need in the intro to set the reader up for the story that I'm going to tell through the rest of the paper? So I'm going to go through each of these pretty quickly. Feel free to drop any questions if you have any. And I have some examples from a recent paper that, well, recent as in like 4 years ago, where it was in process to publish. So it just has some examples, which I think are nice to see in a format. So for the methods, again, assuming that you had storyboarded in the beginning, the figures, now you're writing the methods, you're writing them as you go. What's nice is they are to the point. There's no fluff. You want to be as concise as possible with no filler words. It's past tense, third person. And that is something that is hard for students to write with at first. They want to say, I did this, I did that. When you actually have to think about the experiment being done, it's a bit more passive tense than we would like. It's hard to also find an active third person. And so that's sometimes where the war comes in with writing. But it's a lot more about the idea that the experiment happened rather than I did everything, which in most cases, even when you are doing first person, it's a we, not an I, because it's always a group that you need to do. And yes, you will have access to the documents that I showed before. That's going to be in the handout that I sent out, was that template that I scrolled through. And it's really pretty simple, where you're just trying to make sure that you include product names and part numbers. Sometimes you want to include the SKU or the actual number of the product itself, if you have it. So things like that. And you do not, the biggest error I always see in writers is they want to include the results in there. They want to say what happened, and you can't. You just have to literally say what you did. And that's why it's kind of nice to have the students write it as they go, because they won't have the results yet. So there won't be this inclination to want to put it in. For the results, as I stated, you want to start with the data, the graphs, the tables. And you can have tables, but this is really where the story comes in, is in those figures when you storyboard. And this is probably the most, it seems obvious that it's the most important part, but what I mean is presentation is everything when you're talking about figures. The biggest failure, which I'll also mention, is thinking that all your data is of equal importance or equal value, which is not true. And in many cases, a lot of data gets left out appropriately because it doesn't add to the story, or it's a separate story, or it's a necessary supplement. There's a reason why articles have supplementary figures. So things like that. So you really have to ask yourself, what is the critical few images and diagrams and graphs that I need to show, and what is the order in which I need to create them in order to tell a story, and persuade the reader that what I have found is in fact true and has the implications that I need it to have. It should be able to stand alone, the figures themselves. Each figure, as I mentioned, should tell a story and lead to the next. Now, sometimes whenever we're talking about that, there's this idea that I put the figures in the order that I completed them. And most of the time, actually, that's not true. Sometimes it is. But a lot of times you might need to do the work in various orders. Maybe you found a result and it made you go back. And what you might need to do is actually either start from the middle of the research that you did, because really logically it's the beginning. Or you might want to play with it a bit, where sometimes it's actually more interesting if you show the end result and then you take the reader through how and why. It's really about storytelling, and it all depends on where you want to go with that story. You can say the results in the beginning, you can lead them through the process, through time-wise, you can lead them through logically. There's so many ways in which you can lay out that story, just like you're writing an essay or a poem. but you need to ask yourself what will be easiest for the reader to absorb and what will persuade them the best, or what will capture their attention the most. Once you've storyboarded, then you can finally write the results to explain the figures. And the biggest, again, downfall that I see here is writers want to put in their opinions and interpretations. There are no opinions here. You are literally just saying the data and the results and the observations. So it's very important to make sure you're not putting your interpretations. This is also past tense, third person. For the discussion, you have here the opportunity to further expand on the implications of the results. This is where you get to opine. You see a lot of the words, suggest this, suggest that. And that's because we as scientists don't want to say it is this, it is that. It's a theory, it's an opinion about what we think the implications are for the future of this. And until those results are fully put out there and they're repeatable and they're robust and blah, 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 and they've existed for 10, 20 years, we can't ever say definitively, this is something, this is the theory. It also gives us an opportunity in this section to explain the results and relevance to our hypothesis. Do we prove, disprove the hypothesis, does it support it, those sorts of things, and to the field itself. What does this mean in terms of the significance, the knowledge gap? Has it been filled? The impact to the field? And so we need to readdress everything that you will see is initially addressed in the introduction. This, even though it is largely past tense and third person, you can have a bit more present tense and first person, especially whenever you mention the hypothesis. You have to own the hypothesis. You have to say, we hypothesize. So that's where some of the first person can come in. When you're talking about the field as it stands today, that's where the present tense comes in. But if you're trying to readdress the experiments or the results that you had, that would be past tense. So it gets a little mixy in the discussion and the introduction when you're talking about tenses and the perspective. Finally, after you do the discussion, you can do the introduction. With a defined understanding of the story that you are needing to tell the reader, you can finally write the intro to set the reader up to lead them into the actual story. You can introduce and explain the history. In fact, you need to ask yourself, what are all the techniques that you used? What are all the fields that you're bridging? And you want to address each of those fields in your introduction. In fact, if y'all read most papers, you will find that they do that. They may not have headers that break it down, but for instance, in this paper that we wrote about microRNAs, atherosclerosis, rosette nanotubes, which are a type of nanoparticle. And so we addressed each of those, the field of atherosclerosis, the field of microRNAs, the fields of nanoparticles, and then tied it all up. But you have to address each of the history of each of the key elements or fields that you have within your paper. It is mostly present tense because you're talking about the field as it stands, although you can talk about the history leading into the fields. It's still third person, except for when you do your hypothesis, you state your hypothesis, that's when it's first person. Again, you need to define each key element and the history. You need to explain atherosclerosis. You need to explain what are microRNAs and which ones are you using and how are you using it and things like that. Where we are now in the field, the gap in the knowledge for each of those fields or topics, the importance of this particular study and understanding and how it's going to fill in that knowledge gap. The question that you've developed, that are in the fields. It's not really you developed it, it's a question that's in the field, again, addresses the gap in knowledge, your hypothesis, and then the implications for solving or being able to prove or disprove this hypothesis, as well as a brief description of the study and how it answers the question. And that usually is a great transition straight into the methods, which is, we hypothesize through this study, it means this and that, and this and blah, 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 straight into the methods. After you've built all that, now you can do the abstract, which usually is actually really nice. Most people think you start with the abstract, and that makes it really hard if you start with the abstract because it is a very succinct process, which already makes it difficult. You'll know that writing something short and succinct is always the most difficult because every word has to have value within that paragraph or that, in this case, abstract. Well, if you've written the paper, it's a lot easier to pull out what are the most important factors. And so it's really about including a line from each of the major parts of the article. It's about a 4 to 8 sentence summary, 1 to 2 sentences for the introduction, where you should also mention the hypothesis, 1 to 2 for your key methods, 1 to 2 for your key results, and then 1 to 2 for your discussion. And in many instances, in the template that I give you, I actually put those as subheaders. A lot of conferences or presentations or articles or journals will actually encourage you to leave these headers in as is. So introduction, methods. So if you just write it that way, it also makes it easier for students to know that they can do that. They can just have introduction, 1 to 2 sentences, so on and so forth. And then finally, the title. The best titles tend to tease the ending and make the reader ask how and why. So for instance, even this one, when we were talking about microRNA nanotherapeutics for the treatment of inflammation in atherosclerotic plaques, I would say it asks you, even though I know there's a lot of jargon in there, remember these were scientific articles in the field. But in this case, it would have been like, wait a minute, we're using RNA therapeutics, which is already extremely rare, for treatment. And that would pique the reader and be like, how are they thinking of doing this? And already they'd be like, nah, that's not possible. I don't believe it. And then they want to jump in and read it. Now, it can also be comical. There are some great articles that you can search that are comical. The problem with these is that you have to be very cautious. Some of them, the reader may not read correctly if you're using acronyms or if you're trying to twist the word in the way that it's pronounced. You just have to be very careful. I think some of them are great. It also requires sometimes an exposure if it's an alliteration or a knowledge of previous research or literary works. You have to assume that your reader knows all that. So you just have to be careful about some of your comical, but some of them are really great. The more boring titles do just describe kind of the methods, where in this case, it would be microRNA nanotherapeutics for delivery of RNA to cells or something like that. And then in that case, it would be like, okay, but we wanted to make an impact, no, we're wanting to treat something here. So, it's okay. There's a lot of titles that just say the method. It's a lot more exciting if you kind of tease what it is that you're trying to do with this or what you're trying to really answer. Last 2 slides, I know I'm running long, but writing tips. So as you're aware, as I mentioned, being concise and to the point is so critical. And I think this is a great learning lesson for all writers. I remember the first time I really tried to write scientific writing in college, and my professor was the editor for the New England Journal of Medicine. And I mean, she literally destroyed everything that I wrote. And it was the best lesson ever, even though it was very depressing at the time. You think you're a good writer and you realize you're not. But it was a great lesson for how to be little things, how I could switch out 2 words for 1 word. And if you do that enough, it makes the writing so clear and crisp and to the point to where the reader can't but understand what you're trying to say. And there's a lot of power in that. You do, again, want to tell a story, not only with your words, but more importantly, with your data. Of course, we understand, consider your audience. Revise. Anything I ever write, I assume is never going to look in the end the way it is in the beginning. If you do, then you're open for a rude awakening. Consider the jumps in logic. This is one thing where, especially if you're in the research and you're in the writing, what you're thinking is obvious to you will most likely not be obvious to the reader. And so recognizing that and realizing that you really do need to break it down to its simplest terms and tell every single step in logic that you are thinking to the reader. And that's where transitions are critical. And to either avoid or define jargon based on that audience is really important. And recognize, I think this is the biggest point, that you are selling your research. Even though we like to think that data in science is hard, fast facts, there is a story there and there is a way to present it. And yes, the facts are the facts. But at the same point, there is a level of persuasion that needs to happen in this process. And I think that gets forgotten as well. what not to do, start from the beginning. As you can see, most of this was always about starting from the end or where you want to get to. Fail to see the story as you go, add filler, opine at the beginning, or really try and make your interpretations from the beginning of the article or even just the beginning of the process altogether. You really need, I mean, the hypothesis is kind of an opinion, but even when I have a hypothesis, I always come from the fact that's always, it's actually exciting when you're proven wrong. So, really thinking that anything could happen and coming from that perspective. Don't present raw data. It's never enjoyable. I've made that mistake a few times. Treat all data as valuable and important because it's not. Again, you need to tell a story with it, and you're going to leave out a lot. Overstate your implications and the importance to this study, but then underdeliver in the results. That's why you want to build out your whole story and really ask yourself, okay, what did I actually show before I make these huge grand gestures on how critical this study actually was. And then the opposite is get lost in the details and not see the big picture, which is kind of understate and over deliver. You want to make sure that people know if you do have something that's earth shattering and world renowned and, world changing, that you mention that, and that, you think that this is a valuable impact to the field itself. So with that, I'm going to open it up to the last 4 minutes or so to questions. And thank you all so much for your time. I hope if y'all could let your students know about our AJ STEM program, if they're interested. We think about opening up applications soon. I think, as we mentioned, they should be coming up. We will start opening them up, I think, probably towards the end of this year, and then they'll close around, I think we had, when was it? March or May 23rd, somewhere in
May
there.
23rd.
Thank you, Rachel. And yeah, feel free to hop on if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for the presentation. It was really informative and very helpful. And I think the students will learn a lot from this, especially like I teach middle school science. And I know that students run away from writing because they have this fear that, they might not do as well. My only question is that in case we don't get the slides, what would you recommend if we miss out on? Because I know these slides are really useful.
Yeah, so if for some reason you all don't get the slides, please just feel free to email us. I'll drop the info@stemi.org, or you can also email me at andrea@stemi.org. I'll drop both. And yeah, we'll just send them to you. Anything else? Anybody, any other questions? All right, well, thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to having some of y'all involved. No, there's no cost for the writing program. It's completely free. So, I mean, the way most of our programs, so the question is, do you only work with students? So the way most of our programming is that we target students. But obviously, if parents or teachers want to sit in or join on anything, they're more than welcome. So, please feel free if you all want to go through this process or take it as an opportunity to kind of, be a teach the teacher type moment. Please feel free to join. You're more than welcome. We want to pass knowledge, so no limits there. When does the writing program start? It starts May. So that's why rolling applications are in till May 20. Let me check. Or no, I think it starts June. Okay, let me share. I'm going to share my screen again with the timeline, so it's a little easier. So we have rolling applications to May 23rd, and the program launches June 1st. And we'll, I would say, keep open for the if you want to know when that launch and when the applications are happening. I'm sure we're going to connect with Heather and SEFH and make sure that's known as well and send out that information. But you can also, I think, probably maybe just email at info@stemi.org. We need to create a newsletter or an email list just for AJ STEM. That hasn't been done yet. So just email us and then we'll add you to that email list so where you can stay updated. Let me see, is there a way we can receive mentoring for our writing currently, although the program officially begins? I don't know. That's a really tough question because we don't have, we're not really running anything right now. I think we can probably, if you want to set up something separate where maybe we come in and do some outside workshops, just email me and we can chat. We can figure out how we can do that, what that would look like. Let me see. Can students volunteer for AJ STEM? So yes, so we will need volunteers. It depends on what type of volunteering. What we actually need is students to kind of help work with other students. Right now, Rachel has been running our blog and we have quite a few student editors. And we're going to go through that process and have those students help edit some of these articles and do it that way. So that's one way they can volunteer. They can also volunteer through our STEM-E internship program or any other way that they want to volunteer. So just email us. How can we find out which project we should do if we have multiple ideas? So I'm assuming you mean like research project, which research projects you should do. Well, anytime you're trying to break down which research projects you want to do, you should really ask yourself, again, it's easier to storyboard and ask yourself, which is the most feasible, different metrics, which is going to be the most impactful, which will be the most feasible or easy to complete, which is the easiest gap to fill, and then also ask your question, what if it fails? Some studies, when they fail, they're still extremely valuable. Well, I would say most studies, when they fail, there's some value to be gained. However, some studies there's actually really something important there when it fails. So if you have an opportunity to win no matter what, whether you prove your hypothesis right or wrong, those are also some interesting experiments that you might want to think about because some of them are, if you fail, you fail. Like for instance, if it's more application based, like you're trying to treat something or build something, when it fails, all that says is, I couldn't get it to work. So there's not really a positive result. But if you're doing a science question where if it's a yes or a no, that no can still answer something there. So that's one way to think about it. When you say 5-month program, what exactly would be the student's time commitment? So it depends on the student. We do think this is going to be a self-selecting program because it is pretty long and it is free. But when they join, we will have 1 hour weekly or bi-weekly meetings. The first in each month is going to be kind of it'll all be virtual, by the way, but we're going to go over the section itself. And then we're going to use student examples to go through each of the sections and help give and provide advice. And then we'll also be doing offline editing as well. So where they'll send in their methods section, they'll send in their results, and then our student editors and everything will work together to edit it as we go. Okay, so the way you come up with science fair project ideas, I think probably maybe Heather might be best on this because my experience is more in lab-based stuff, so I'm not sure I'm the best source for that. But the way that I would do it is I would just research. I would Google what else has been done. I would then pick a field that I'm interested in. And then I would do research in that field and I'd read up and I'd ask myself, okay, which projects are feasible in, again, your timeline. What's your timeline? Do you have 3 months, 2 months? How many hours a week? What's the cost going to be? Do I have access to laboratory materials? Do I have access to a makerspace if it's something where I need to build or test? So what are my resources? What's my budget? What's my timeline? And use all that information plus research in the field and what I'm passionate about to build out a project that way. Heather, do you have any?
I do. Yeah. No, thank you so much. That's great. Those are great suggestions, Andrea. And also, there's something called Science Buddies, just as a starter But even more so, I highly suggest, talking about writing and technical skills is to actually read those scientific magazines, because those scientific magazines and reports will kind of give you some ideas as to what could potentially be there. Maybe you want to try to replicate, but also maybe tweak a variable or two to see if there would be some type of differentiation. So, those are areas that you could start with as a grounds for conversation as an idea generation.
Yeah. Okay, so the SEFH is taking place in January. So the students who are participating will not be able to do AJ STEM training program. So is that correct? I thought the SEFH was in February. Is that?
Yes, if it is in February. It's February 25 and 26.
Okay, and our program is actually running, the 5-month program is running from June 1st through November 1st. But the first issue is not launched till February 1st. So they can just, it gives them a few extra months to edit as they go. So either way, whether it's in January or February for SCFH, we're not overlapping. And remember, they're not going to do the 5-month program until they've done the competition and completed. So if they're doing the competition, say in 2023, they're doing their experiments in 2023, okay? Then that means they do the competition in 2024 and they would join our 2024 writing program after they've completed the competitions. So that's the way it would work. And if they're doing their experiments now, they would do their competition 2023 and join 2023 writing program after they're done. And as far as what I recommend to guide help for students, I know that SCFH has a great writing course. I would say you could do research and you can Google other writing tips. The handout I'm going to give you has some great resources as well. It's a very easy kind of fill in the blanks somewhat. So that, and I have references on there that you can read up on. So yeah, it would be more of a self-learning. I don't know any other writing courses, but I'm sure you can Google and, go through them if you want to do other writing courses as well. All right. Thank you all so much and great questions.